infancy. It may be in utero while you're still in your mother's womb. And so these diseases, the misfolding, Parkinson's, like Alzheimer's disease and other neurological diseases, are associated with a misfolding of a protein. The protein that's misfolded in Parkinson's is different than Alzheimer's. But you got a misfolding of the protein, and this misfolding of the protein actually might begin outside the brain. So in 2003, this really smart German pathologist named Dr. Heiko Braak developed the Braak hypothesis, saying that Parkinson's disease is not primarily a brain disease. The roots, the origins of Parkinson's begin outside of the brain, and the two ports of entry where Parkinson's most likely begins are the gut. And so many people know that there's people have constipation. 80% of people with Parkinson's have constipation, and often precedes the diagnosis. And I think more powerfully, the nose. So all these toxins I mentioned early on, air pollution, certain pesticides, these dry cleaning chemicals, all of them are inhaled. And we know that the Parkinson's pathology is found almost universally in the smell center of the brain. 80% of people have it. And one of the earliest features of Parkinson's disease is loss of smell.
All right, to make sure I have this correct then. So the two areas where things begin aren't in the brain. It could be the nose or the gut. We have these misfolded proteins. Let's talk about what happens in the physiology from there, how they get in the brain and what they do there.
Yeah, so the misfolding, again, this is for the majority of people, misfolding might begin in the gut and it might begin in the nose. Now, how do you get from the gut to the brain? It turns out that the misfolded protein can spread from nerve cell to nerve cell. Dr. Virginia Lee at the University of Pennsylvania and her colleagues have shown that that a misfolded protein in a nerve cell can spread from one nerve cell to another nerve cell. And listeners to your show probably have heard about the vagus nerve, which is basically a very long nerve, a superhighway that connects the gut to the brain. And so it could be that misfolding of the protein in the nerve cells in the gut. You know, your gut has nerve cells, right? It moves, so it needs to have the nerve cells to tell the gut to move, can then spread backwards, upwards, up into the brainstem and then to different parts of the brain. Same thing could happen in the nose, and some great research done by Dr. Lilian Calderon, Darcy Duenas in Mexico City showed that people who were exposed to high levels of air pollution in the early 1990s, Mexico City had the worst air quality in the world, had misfolding of this protein, alpha-synuclein, in the lining of their noses and in the smell centers of the brain. And then it can then spread from the smell centers of the brain to parts of the brain that are responsible for movement. So the classic tremor, slowness of movement, stiffness, difficulty with walking that are classic associated with Parkinson's disease. And then later stages of the disease spread to parts of the brain that are responsible for memory. So people in later stages of Parkinson's disease have memory impairment. And then even later stages, it goes to the cortex, which is responsible likely for hallucinations. So the spread from nerve cell to nerve cell of this misfolded protein may be responsible for why the sequence of symptoms that people experience, beginning with loss of smell or constipation, then, often difficulties with tremor and movement, then difficulties with memory, and then the later stages, difficulties with hallucination.
So this is really interesting. So it's starting outside the brain, traveling up the neurons into the brain. And the way I understand it is the first area to be impacted. You explained it very well there. The fact that it starts, I think it was with movements that are impacted and then works its way out.
Yeah.
Is the first area that's impacted in the brainstem area, the substantia nigra?
No. So actually, so we know, for example, if it begins in the gut, there's this really smart Danish scientist, Per Borghammer, who's postulated that there's either a brain first or a gut first model of Parkinson's disease. And the brain first might be better characterized as nose first. And that so the gut goes up to the vagus nerve, goes up to the brainstem, the part of that brain that connects the brain to the spinal cord. And there you can get problems with sleep. So people with Parkinson's disease often early in their course of the disease, some individuals act out their dreams. So you can see abnormal sleep patterns. You can see problems with blood pressure. You can see abnormal sweating. That these are actually early features of the disease, in some cases precede the classic tremor, which might be a mid-stage portion of the disease. Actually, the classic tremor might be mid-stage of the disease and then later developing it. Now, if it begins in the nose, it kind of bypasses the brainstem, so it might be going more directly. I personally think most of Parkinson's disease is due to nose first, But you can imagine that you can inhale pesticides, but you can also ingest pesticides both on food and in pesticide contaminated groundwater. People who get their water from wells are often not protected, for example, by the Safe Drinking Water Act, and can be for years, especially when they were children, be drinking pesticide laden drinking water and never know about it.
Okay. So I think I understand now. So it's either going to